Michael Foster, a 38-year-old veteran, had never imagined that a simple walk through the hills of Cedar Creek would leave him with the most significant decision of his life. The landscape stretched endlessly before him, untouched, vast, and serene. The mountains in the distance reminded him of his time in the Army, where every day had felt like a battle, not just against external forces, but against his own emotions. It was his quiet moments, like this one, that had always grounded him. But now, as he walked through the land he called home, the silence only amplified the loneliness he had felt since his return from the war. 2 years had passed since Michael returned from deployment, but the weight of the memories was still fresh. The therapy sessions, the self-help books, even his sister Rebecca's constant encouragement had not been enough to break through the wall that had grown between him and the world. It wasn't that he didn't want to heal, it was that the healing didn't seem to come. Nothing could fill the emptiness left by the war, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't stop thinking about his best friend, his partner in the field, Duke. Duke had been there for him through it all. The dangerous missions, the sleepless nights, the moments when Michael thought he might not make it out alive. Duke had been his anchor. But after a life-changing injury, Duke had been forced into early retirement and placed in an animal shelter. The pain of losing him had been unbearable. Michael hadn't been ready to face life without his partner, and the wound left by that separation still hurt every day. Now, here he was, walking toward the very shelter where Duke had been placed. His sister Rebecca had convinced him that adopting another dog might help him heal, might give him something to focus on other than the darkness that constantly crept into his thoughts. And so, after weeks of internal debate, Michael had reluctantly agreed. But deep down, he knew there was only one dog he wanted, Duke. Michael's inner turmoil is something that many veterans experience upon returning home. The transition from combat to civilian life is challenging in ways that most people can't understand. The bond between a soldier and their war dog is more profound than words can express. It's a partnership forged in the most extreme conditions, and when that bond is broken, it leaves a gap that's hard to fill. It's why Michael's journey is not just about reconnecting with Duke. It's about learning to heal, to move forward, and to let go of the past. The shelter was small, tucked away on the edge of Cedar Creek, a place Michael had driven past countless times without ever giving it a second thought. But today, it seemed different. Today, it held the key to his healing. As Michael walked through the gates, the sounds of barking filled the air. Some dogs eagerly jumped at the bars of their cages, desperate for attention, while others lay quietly, their eyes glazed over with resignation. Michael walked past each cage, looking at the animals but seeing nothing that sparked the connection he so desperately needed. Then, the worker led him to the back. She stopped in front of a cage in the farthest corner, where a large German shepherd lay in a heap, his back legs stiff and his eyes distant. Michael's heart stopped. The dog's fur was familiar, black and tan, just like Duke's, but there was something different about him, something broken. "His name's Duke," the worker said softly. "He's been through a lot. We think he was abandoned. He's got some trust issues, but he's a sweet dog. Just needs time." The name hit Michael like a punch in the stomach. His Duke, his partner, his best friend. But as Michael looked into the dog's eyes, there was no recognition, no spark of the bond they had once shared. Duke merely stared at him, a blank look in his eyes, as if Michael was just another stranger. Michael swallowed hard, his chest tight with emotion. "Duke," he whispered. "It's me, Michael." The dog didn't react. He didn't wag his tail, didn't move closer. He just stared. This is a crucial moment in the story. For Michael, the lack of recognition from Duke represents everything he has struggled with since his return from war. The feeling of being forgotten, of being adrift, unable to make a real connection. Duke's inability to recognize him isn't just about the dog. It's about Michael's sense of self and his relationship with the world around him. Healing is difficult, and it often feels like you're fighting an uphill battle. But the moment Michael speaks to Duke, there's a glimmer of hope. It shows that, despite the pain, he's willing to keep trying. Michael decided to take Duke home. The drive was silent, filled with tension, as Duke lay in the back of the truck, his body stiff and his eyes distant. Every time Michael looked in the rearview mirror, he saw the same emptiness reflected in Duke's gaze. It was a painful reminder of how far apart they had drifted. When they finally arrived at Michael's ranch, a small house on the outskirts of Cedar Creek, Michael led Duke inside, careful not to force anything. He had set up a bed in the living room, alongside food and water bowls, but Duke remained distant. He sniffed the air, then retreated to a corner, his eyes watchful. Michael sighed and sat down on the couch. He had expected this. He had hoped for more, but deep down, he knew it would take time. Duke had been through a lot, and so had he. The bond they once shared couldn't be rebuilt overnight. Over the next few weeks, Michael worked tirelessly to gain Duke's trust. He threw balls for the dog to fetch, but Duke ignored them. He tried feeding Duke by hand, but the dog would only eat when Michael wasn't looking. Every day felt like a setback, but Michael refused to give up. Then, one morning, Michael decided to try something different. He took out Duke's old military vest, tattered and worn from their time in the field, and walked outside with it in his hands. "Do you remember this, Duke?" he asked softly, holding the vest in front of the dog. Duke sniffed the air, his eyes locking onto the vest for a brief moment. Michael's heart raced. He thought he saw a flicker of recognition, but the moment was fleeting. Duke turned away, retreating to the corner of the room. Michael didn't give up. He left the vest in the yard, giving Duke space to approach it on his own time. Slowly, the dog walked toward it, sniffing it cautiously. It wasn't much, but it was progress. Michael could feel it. Rebuilding trust after trauma is a slow process. Michael's repeated attempts to bond with Duke showed just how difficult it can be to reconnect with someone or something you've lost. Sometimes, even the smallest signs of progress can feel like huge victories. Healing isn't linear. It's a series of steps forward, some bigger than others, but each one bringing you closer to where you need to be. Over the following weeks, Michael and Duke's relationship began to take small but significant strides forward. Michael had learned that healing wasn't linear. There were days when Duke seemed to make no progress, and Michael would feel the sting of rejection once again. But each small step, no matter how seemingly insignificant, filled him with hope. One afternoon, Michael decided to take Duke on a walk through Cedar Creek. The town was small, but it held so many memories for him. Memories of peace, and of the times when he was simply a man and his dog, unburdened by the weight of war. The gentle breeze ruffled his hair as they walked side by side, Duke on a leash for the first time in months. "Let's take it slow, buddy," Michael murmured, glancing down at the dog. "I know you've got it in you." Duke walked at his side, still cautious but no longer stiff with fear. Every once in a while, the dog would glance up at him, and Michael saw a flicker of the old Duke in his eyes. It wasn't much, but it was enough. They reached a small park in the heart of the town, a place where Michael had once taken Duke to run and play during their training days. The field was empty now, but as Michael stood by the gate, he could almost hear the laughter of children and the echoes of their past, the joy they had shared. He opened the gate and let Duke off the leash. The dog hesitated for a moment, looking around as if unsure, but then, to Michael's surprise, Duke ran forward. His body was fluid, his movements graceful and free, just like the old days. Michael's heart swelled as he watched Duke run across the grass, his tail wagging gently. "Good boy," Michael said, his voice filled with emotion. Healing is often a quiet, slow process, but in moments like this, where Duke runs with freedom, it's clear that progress has been made. Healing isn't about erasing the pain, but about finding joy and peace again. Michael and Duke's journey together is a reminder that the past doesn't have to define us, and that there are always moments of hope, even in the midst of the struggle. As days turned into weeks, Michael and Duke's bond deepened. Duke had become more comfortable in his new home, and Michael had found a sense of peace that had long eluded him. Yet, the journey wasn't over. There were still moments when the old pain would resurface, when Duke would retreat back into the shadows of his trauma. But Michael understood now. He knew that healing wasn't about forcing the dog to forget. It was about being patient, offering comfort without expectation, and allowing Duke to come to him in his own time. One evening, as Michael sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the hills of Cedar Creek, he noticed Duke lying on the porch beside him. The dog's eyes were fixed on the horizon, his posture relaxed. "You've come a long way, haven't you?" Michael murmured, reaching down to scratch behind Duke's ears. The dog tilted his head slightly, acknowledging the touch. For the first time since Duke's return, Michael didn't feel the weight of the past hanging over him. They had both found a way forward, together. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. And as he sat there, watching the world around him grow darker with each passing moment, Michael knew that he had finally found peace. It's in the quiet moments like this, when everything seems still, that we realize just how far we've come. Michael and Duke's journey together is a testament to the power of patience and unconditional love. Both man and dog have faced immense challenges, but through it all, they've learned that healing is possible, one day at a time. As the months passed, Michael began to feel that things were finally falling into place. But then, one evening, something happened that brought all the old fears rushing back. Michael and Duke were walking through the woods near the ranch, a place that had always brought Michael comfort. But as they walked deeper into the trees, they heard the unmistakable sound of a growl, low, threatening, and close. Duke immediately tensed, his body rigid with fear. His ears stood up, and his eyes darted around, searching for the source of the sound. "Stay close, buddy," Michael whispered, his voice calm but firm. They continued walking, but the growl came again, louder this time. The hairs on the back of Michael's neck stood on end. He knew they weren't alone. Suddenly, out of the shadows, a large coyote emerged, its eyes gleaming in the low light. Duke froze, his muscles tense. Michael took a step forward, positioning himself between Duke and the coyote, though he wasn't sure what good it would do. The animal was close, and Michael had no weapons with him. For a moment, the coyote stared at them, its growl echoing through the trees. Michael stood still, knowing that any movement could provoke the animal. Duke remained by his side, his body stiff, eyes locked on the coyote. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the coyote turned and disappeared into the underbrush. Michael exhaled a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "That was close," Michael murmured, looking down at Duke. The dog hadn't moved, hadn't reacted. Michael bent down and gently patted Duke's head. "You did good, buddy." Duke didn't respond immediately, but as Michael looked into the dog's eyes, he saw something there. A spark of recognition, a glimmer of trust that hadn't been there before. The fear that had once gripped Duke seemed to have faded, and in its place was a new sense of calm. Fear is a powerful emotion, and it can cause even the strongest to falter. But Michael and Duke's encounter with the coyote is a turning point. It shows that healing isn't just about physical recovery, it's about emotional resilience. Both Michael and Duke have faced their fears, and while the shadows of their pasts will never fully disappear, they've learned to stand together in the face of them. The days that followed were filled with both peace and uncertainty. Michael knew that the journey ahead was still fraught with challenges. But now, with Duke by his side, he felt a strength he hadn't known before. They were no longer just two survivors. They were partners, bound by a shared journey of recovery and healing. One morning, Michael made the decision to take Duke on a trip to the old training field, a place where they had spent countless hours preparing for the toughest missions. It had been a place of strength for both of them, a place where they had learned to trust one another implicitly. As they arrived at the field, Michael let Duke off the leash. The dog ran into the open space, his body moving fluidly, as if he had been waiting for this moment. Michael watched him, his heart swelling with pride. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. Duke returned to Michael, carrying a ball in his mouth. He dropped it at Michael's feet, eyes bright, full of life. "Good boy," Michael whispered. Reaching down to pick up the ball, he tossed it into the air, and Duke ran after it without hesitation. For the first time in a long time, Michael felt the weight of the past lift from his shoulders. He had his partner back. This moment symbolizes the culmination of their journey, a moment of full trust, where the past is no longer a burden. Michael and Duke have both found healing in their own ways, and now they can move forward, side by side. The field, once a place of training and conflict, has become a place of peace and reconciliation. As Michael and Duke walked back to the truck, the sun was setting behind them. The sky was painted with hues of orange and pink, a reminder of the journey they had both undertaken. They had both suffered, both fought battles that no one else could understand. But now, as they walked together, Michael knew they had reached a new beginning. They had faced the darkness, and they had emerged stronger together. "We're ready for whatever comes next," Michael whispered, looking down at Duke. The dog's tail wagged in agreement, as if to say, "We've got this." And as they drove back home to Cedar Creek, Michael knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, he and Duke would face them together. Whatever the future held, they were ready for it.